Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I am Malik. Hyle!
Malik, I am excited right now as a Donkey Kong fan. And not often you can say that in the last 10 years or so, but I am excited as a Donkey Kong fan. Because in the midst of all of the hoopla, or as Lanky Kong would say, hoopla! Of Donkey Kong Country's 30th anniversary, Donkey Kong 64's 25th anniversary, and the forthcoming launch of the Donkey Kong Country theme park in Japan this coming Wednesday. I say Donkey Kong Country theme park as if it's not attached to anything else. Just, yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, it's not.
No, the rest of it can burn down for all I care, so long as Donkey Kong Country is preserved. But in the midst of all of that, which is already like a grand jubilee that we are not accustomed to as Donkey Kong fans, we were gifted by Nintendo because they decided to upload the entire Donkey Kong Land trilogy of games to the Game Boy Nintendo Switch Online little player, little device. I would almost call it a virtual console, but I'm not going to do that.
Almost.
But contrary to what you might think that they would have done if all three were ready to go, they didn't just dump them on one day and say, there's Donkey Kong Land, all three, goodbye. No, what they did was something a little bit different, a little bit askew from how they normally handle these things. They staggered the releases across 12 days. So the original Donkey Kong Land, that dropped on Thursday, November 21st. And I'm just, these are the times they dropped in the Americas, right? But
right.
It was a couple of hours after we signed off for our live conversation on Donkey Kong Country's 30th anniversary. And it was like, bam, there's Donkey Kong Land.
There's more.
Yeah. Donkey Kong Land 2 then followed very closely on Monday, November 25th, only 4 days after Donkey Kong Land. And then we were all like, okay, well, Donkey Kong Land 3 is coming. I mean, they don't just do this 1-2 punch and then, they don't raise the third finger. But we had to wait a little bit longer for Donkey Kong Land 3. It wasn't much longer. It might have been the Thanksgiving holiday in the United States that slowed everything down. I don't know. But that then came Tuesday, December 3rd, which was 8 days after Donkey Kong Land 2.
That's what I call, like, you've heard of Gorilla Grip? That's Gorilla Drip. Nice, I got it.
Get that on a shirt. I thought that this method of releasing them was sort of brilliant. Because in my opinion, at least, it definitely extended the hype and the, we'll call it the low C conversation, not to be confused with what we're doing right now, which is a uppercase K Kongversation. But it extended the, I guess, like, online chatter, the fervor around the games and Donkey Kong in general, which I guess Nintendo wants to do right now. They want everybody having Donkey Kong on their lips, and in their grips as they drip. But, that's what we like to see, though. Here at DK Von, and even at the Cartoon Gamer, we like to see constant discussion about Donkey Kong. We like to see it. We love to see it. We love when other people talk about DK. I know I complain when people try to make Donkey Kong December a thing because, one, you just can't come in 1 month out of the year and say Donkey Kong and then not care the other 11 months. No, it's a full-time commitment, baby. But also, two, the holiday season is the most stressful time of the year, and you really want me to, like, try even harder to make Donkey Kong content during December? No, you can go to hell. But overall, I'm always happy to see other people talk about Donkey Kong, right? So this has been a treat. This was a like extended over a couple of weeks. It was delightful to see, and it was especially meaningful for me because of what the Donkey Kong Land games personally represent to me and my fandom. So I was really happy, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do an episode of the conversation about this. Wasn't anticipating talking about the Donkey Kong Land trilogy, towards the end of this season, just like I wasn't anticipating talking about Banjo-Tooie, for example. But, I can't keep up with what Nintendo's doing. They're just throwing things at me so fast, so I'm going to do my best. So in this episode of the conversation, we're going to have a little chat about the Donkey Kong Land trilogy now that they are back in vogue, now that they are somewhat popular again. We're going to talk about the little details that we love, and we're going to be pointing out some things that I might say younger players or players who have just never picked them up, stuff they might not know, stuff they wouldn't know, stuff they might miss. And we're going to discuss why the Donkey Kong Land games are so important to Donkey Kong Universe, and Rare fans of the 1990s. Why are these slightly janky games so beloved? Well, we'll get into all of that. Stay tuned.
Yeah, can't wait to divulge into this.
Before we get into it, though, I just really quickly would like to remind everyone that hey, Malik and I are both on Blue Sky. If you have been mulling about whether to join yet another social media platform, but you've heard everybody's like, you gotta get on Blue Sky. You gotta get on Blue Sky. Well, we're on Blue Sky, so give us a follow.
Yes, please.
Yes. It's become my main social media hub. It has replaced Twitter. I don't post on Twitter anymore. So if you would like nonsense about the DKU in your feed, you can get it, and you'll see it too, because you can just see the people you follow in chronological order. So give us a follow on Blue Sky. Yeah, what a concept. I'm DK Vine on Blue Sky. Just follow the Malik. Are you gaming experience on Blue Sky?
Nope, I'm the cartoon gamer. Thank goodness.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
just unified branding there. Nice.
I nabbed it. I was one of the first people to get on Blue Sky, so I was like, I gotta get this. Well, I still can.
You nutted it, just like a squirrel saving things for the winter.
Gripped it.
All right, we're getting weird now.
I like it. I welcome it.
Of course, DK Vine is on Patreon. We get most of our funding through the Patreon. So if you like the conversation, if you like having dedicated Donkey Kong Universe journalism, then be sure to throw us $1 or $2 a month. I'm not demanding you roll in the bank van, like with the little dollar signs on it. Like, you don't have to back that up. You don't have to, take the dump truck full of gold bullions and dump them on my front lawn. You don't have to do that. Just $1 or $2 a month.
If you don't want to.
Of course, we live stream these episodes for our $5 and up patrons. And hello, we have Freezer, we have Martrose, we have FizzTap, we have Cotbox. Lovely to see all of you right now. And Malik, of course, you're also on Patreon as the Cartoon Gamer.
Yeah, I am. I post stuff every week, even if there's nothing to talk about. So you can't say I don't put out things.
You can say you don't put out, just end it right there. That's a different subscription service, Malik. We're not going to plug that right now. It's a family show.
Yeah, no, I'm a good boy.
Yeah. But, I read your weekly updates. I get them. I check my mail and I'm like, oh yeah, here's Malik's Friday update. I'm going to read it. But Anything you've got going on in your world right now that you'd like to plug, or?
So I won't promise much yet, but I am working on a script for Returns and Tropical Freeze. So depending on when you hear this, it might be out. Like maybe a year from now or something. I don't know, but that is my current thing right now. If it's not my regular work with other people,
right?
That's the next thing in my
you do a lot. You've got many fingers in many different pies.
Mm-hmm.
And you shouldn't do that
as well.
Yeah, it contaminates the pie. Then people don't want to eat it.
Yeah. If I had pie all to myself, I wouldn't care.
Yeah, and then you can lick your fingers, and each finger would have a different flavor.
Oh, heck yeah. You're giving me ideas.
So anyway, let's discuss the Donkey Kong Land trilogy on the Nintendo Switch. So,
okay.
Personally, for me, I can't even think about the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy, which, of course, was released from November 1994 to November 1996, without also thinking about the Donkey Kong Land trilogy, which were always released less than a year after each Donkey Kong Country game. And that tradition started with Donkey Kong Land in June 1995, and then was followed by Donkey Kong Land 2 in September 1996, and Donkey Kong Land 3 in October 1997. And I was there, Malik. I was there. I'm not trying to gatekeep by saying like I was there from the start.
Yeah. I was there.
It doesn't matter when you got into this fandom, so long as you're in it. That's my opinion. But I can provide some historical context for things that maybe our younger fans or people who just didn't get into this until later wouldn't know. And I can say, as somebody who was there from the start, that Donkey Kong Land was a huge damn deal back in the day. Now, keep in mind, Malik, that Donkey Kong Land was only the second game that utilized that modern rare-style Donkey Kong character. And Diddy Kong, for that matter. Like, this was their second outing. They weren't in any Mario Karts. They weren't in even a second Super Nintendo game. No cameos, no crossovers. It was just Donkey Kong Country. And then here came Donkey Kong Land 7 months later. And
that's crazy to think about.
Yeah, it was a simpler time, right? Not having Mario parties to consider, not having all these debates about who's going to be in Smash Brothers. Well, guess what? We didn't know what Smash Brothers was because Smash Brothers didn't exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
All we had was Donkey Kong Country. I sound like Cranky Kong now. And we were happy, damn it. No, we weren't happy because we wanted more. It was insatiable, the urge to consume more Donkey Kong products. So here came Donkey Kong Land, and it was coming out right when Donkey Kong Country was still very much a cultural sensation. It was basically something that always came up when people brought up video games during this time. And it was definitely the biggest thing Nintendo had going on at that moment. Like, publicly, front-facing, it was Donkey Kong Country. That was what their world revolved around during this era. And so, like I said, it came out 7 months after this white-hot, absolutely unprecedented release of Donkey Kong Country in November 1994. And so Donkey Kong Land not only rode that wave of what I call Donkey Kong Country mania, but it also helped make that wave a little bit steeper. Mm-hmm. Marketing and merchandise for Donkey Kong began to incorporate the Donkey Kong Land brand in addition to Donkey Kong Country. And this effectively replaced Donkey Kong 94. Whenever they wanted to push, say, the Game Boy or just another Donkey Kong game alongside Donkey Kong Country, because for that first 7 months, they would have to push Donkey Kong 94. It was the most recent release bearing the Donkey Kong brand. And so it would be like, oh, you can win a new TV and a Super Nintendo and Donkey Kong Country. Second prize winners can win Donkey Kong 94 and a Game Boy.
That's a second prize. That's, I mean, that's good, but like, I can see a bit. I can see some people being a bit upset about that.
Well, again, talking about how historical perspective shifts and people who weren't really in the thick of it, they don't really have an understanding. Donkey Kong 94 is considered a classic now, and most connoisseurs of video games would say Donkey Kong 94 is a superior game to any Donkey Kong Land game. And begrudgingly, I might agree with that, even though personally speaking, it can kick rocks, can suck eggs. Compared to Donkey Kong Land, I'm biased. I'm a rare baby, right? So Donkey Kong Land is my jam, and I don't care how good Donkey Kong 94 is. It's just not going to do it for me. It's not going to get me there. It's not going to cross the finish line for me because I like Rare's Donkey Kong. I like Diddy Kong. I like Hogwash the Flying Pig, Malik, and that's just the way I am. To quote Lady Gaga, I was born this way.
I understand that, and like I love Donkey Kong 94 too, but I can't even compare the two. If I had to say, it's not like one's a puzzle platformer, the other's just a platformer. But
right.
Even though I love Donkey Kong 94 a heck of a lot, I'd probably still go with the Land games myself.
And it's funny because I feel like Donkey Kong 94 has definitely been built up in the last 3 decades, whereas Donkey Kong Land has definitely been diminished. It's not talked about as much. But at the time, it was there. It was ever present. And like I said, they incorporated it into the marketing of Donkey Kong Country Mania. And so, especially that first year or so, we would get tie-ins like the Donkey Kong Land bubble gum, Malik. I've talked about this stuff because I would always get it in the checkout line with my mom. Like they would have it at like the Kmart and sometimes like the supermarket, and so it would come packaged. It was actually a repackaging. It was this company called A Mural Confections, and they had this licensed Game Boy bubble gum where it would come in these little plastic like miniature Game Boy facsimiles, and you would break the seal on a sticker, pop open the lid, and they would just be sheets of bubble gum, and inside you would get like trading cards with like Game Boy game like box art, and collect the trading cards. In 1995, they rebranded this to just be Donkey Kong Land bubblegum. And, there's nothing Donkey Kong about it except Donkey and Diddy are on the cover with the Donkey Kong Land logo. That was enough for me. Like, I was like...
You can really taste the Donkey Kong Land.
It really tastes like it's really been just marinating in Donkey Kong's BO. You stick it in your mouth and you're like, yeah, that tastes like a stinky ape.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Stinky ape summer in my mouth.
If you haven't eaten it in like when you bought it, it probably does taste like that nowadays.
I'm not really a bubblegum person. Even back then when I was a kid, it was just something you chewed because you were a kid and kids chew bubblegum. But it was always just like the worst of both worlds. It was like, you've got to use your mouth for this, but you can't get any nutrients from it, and then you have to dispose of it. And where are you going to dispose of it? So,
I know.
Bubblegum's like this foul thing, really. But I remember the Donkey Kong Land bubblegum to be very soft on the mouth. So, it had that, Diddy mark of quality, where it was just like, anything that Diddy Kong is going to be associated with, it's just going to be more pleasing to me.
He's given the thumbs up, so yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, that's the Diddy Kong seal of quality. Like, yeah, I give it the thumbs up. I'm Diddy Kong.
I have no teeth, so this is pretty good for me.
I gum the gum, yeah.
I gum the gum.
But then you would also have things like the Donkey Kong Country chapter books by Michael, what Teitelbaum? that how you pronounce it?
I'm going to say yes.
Okay. All right.
Baum, I don't know.
Yeah. So he wrote, like, I think 3 Donkey Kong Country chapter books that incorporated elements from Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong Country 2, and Donkey Kong Land. And the famous one, I think the most famous one, is the one that incorporates Donkey Kong Land locations and characters and imagery, called Donkey Kong Country Rumble in the Jungle. And even the cover has the Donkey Kong Land box art with Hogwash the Flying Pigs on there, got Hard Hat the Mole. You'll love to see it.
Oh yeah, I do actually.
At the time, like I said, that first year of Donkey Kong Country Mania, even bleeding into the second year post Donkey Kong Country 2, Donkey Kong Land was just everywhere. And if you were into Donkey Kong Country, if you had a passing interest in it, or you were just a hardcore sicko like me, there was a very good chance you would have gotten into Donkey Kong Land by default. And maybe it was the only one you were into, because maybe you only had a Game Boy. And so this was the only way you could kind of experience the magic of the Donkey Kong Country Mania, by getting Donkey Kong Land. I know a lot of people at the time, that was probably the case. So it was just a core component of those early days. Like I said, the second canonical adventure of Rare's DK crew. And like, the way I just internalized all of this was, I just held the Donkey Kong Land games as almost equally as important as the country games, because they just fleshed out so much of the context of the game world, especially that first one. But like, all 3 of them, I just considered them like holy sacred texts, just like Donkey Kong Country. And I've talked about this before, Malik. Christmas 1995, my parents had a little tabletop nativity scene. I say my parents, it was my mom's. But you know, it was this cheap, gaudy thing with like the baby Jesus and you know, Virgin Mary and the begrudging
some guy.
The begrudging stepdad Joseph. And
I was about to say, yeah, that guy.
Yeah, he didn't really do much except marry a teenager, right? But you got my favorite were like the little animals. You know, it's like, ooh, I got a little cow, I got a little sheep. Ooh. But what I did when my mom wasn't looking was I swapped out Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus with Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong Country 2, and Donkey Kong Land. And Donkey Kong Land was the baby Jesus for like one whole day in the nativity scene.
Did she ever see this?
Yeah, she asked me to take them out. And of course, I wouldn't have kept them in there because I wanted to play them. I was still playing Donkey Kong Country 2. I wasn't going to keep Donkey Kong Country 2 as Joseph or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So even to this day, I think of them as the Holy Family. Those first 3 games.
I like that.
Yeah. So one of the most, I think, low-key heartbreaking things as a day one or week one Donkey Kong Country fan has been seeing the influence and even the general understanding of the Donkey Kong Land games decrease in the popular consciousness over the last 29 years. Like, they've been slowly disregarded by people who have probably never played them as mere downgraded ports. Like, just watered down versions of Donkey Kong Countries 1, 2, and 3. And aside from that very brief time when they were added to the Nintendo 3DS Virtual Console in early 2015, it was in February 2015, we got this great trailer from Nintendo that announced that all 6 games, the 3 country and the 3 land games, were now on the eShop. And it was set to Fear Factory, you know, from Donkey Kong
I
Country.
remember that like it was yesterday.
And they used the play it loud. Like they styled it like the original Donkey Kong Country ad in the Americas. And they recreated it from the ground up. Like they used like the same text.
The same clips.
Yeah. But
White
they
flashes that might give you a seizure.
Right. Yeah. And then they added Country 2, 3, and all 3 land games to it. And it was just this very, very exciting moment because it was like, oh my God, play it loud. They reused play it loud just for Donkey Kong. Yeah. But aside from that, they haven't really been brought up all that much, at least by Nintendo, like promoted as these viable entries in the Donkey Kong canon. And that's always broken my heart because, like I said, I had Donkey Kong Land as the baby Jesus, Christmas 95.
Yeah. I can see why that would break your heart.
It's effectively my religion, Malik. And,
yeah,
you know, I know REM said they were losing their religion in Donkey Konga 2, but I never wanted to apply to Donkey Kong Land. So it's been wonderful these last couple of weeks to see people get excited about Donkey Kong Land again, to see that recognition, and to kind of put them on a little bit of a pedestal in the thick of this renewed Donkey Kong fervor. A fervor that, honestly, we haven't really seen for 30 years. I mean, we've had these little blips of excitement for Donkey Kong, but this full-on marketing push, we haven't really seen this since, I would say, the initial Donkey Kong Country mania of the mid-90s.
Yeah, I mean, again, I wasn't there for that, but, I mean, I'll get into my Donkey Kong Land history a little later, but yeah, it's just very nice to see because, I mean, okay, so I guess I'll go into my history with the land games. What was it? I've mentioned this before on the podcast and in various videos of mine, but Donkey Kong Country on Super Nintendo, the first one was the only one that I had and was the only one I knew about until 2004 when I saw commercials for DKC 2 and 3 on Game Boy Advance. But in the middle of all that, I got a secondhand copy of Donkey Kong Land from somebody, and I had a Super Game Boy as well. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And for the longest time, I just knew Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Land, and that's where everything stopped for me as a Donkey Kong fan until, you know, my perspective was widened a bit more. But I was like, this is the follow-up to Donkey Kong Country. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And that's all I knew. In like 2002, 3. Yeah, 2002, 3. Yeah.
I mean, that was still correct. I mean, you were a little bit behind the times, but you were still fundamentally absolutely spot on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's somebody out there in 2024 that's doing the exact same thing, living under a bigger rock than I was.
Right. You know, and that would be wild if somebody was just now getting into Donkey Kong and they were just like doing it in chronological order. And they were just, and now they can. Now they effectively can up to a certain point. Like you have to like tap out for Diddy Kong Racing because that's still not on NSO. But you could theoretically play like the first 6 games and Mario Kart 64 and have the complete adventures of the modern Donkey Kong, the modern DK crew. So you know,
yeah.
So. What I want to do, because this episode isn't a spotlight, this isn't a general celebration of one game over the other or the other. I wanted to do something that's kind of serves as a primer for the younger fans or those who have just never gotten into the Donkey Kong Land games, and even long-time vets of the Donkey Kong Land trilogy might learn something in this episode. What this episode is basically little facts, little bits of trivia that we're going to share about the Donkey Kong Land games to help widen your understanding of each one. Before we get into that, though, I want to really read the descriptions that Nintendo has provided for all 3. Now, these aren't technically new. These were actually the eShop descriptions from back in 2015. but I don't think many people read those back then. And
yeah, no, they're basically new.
And meanwhile, these were plastered over the YouTube trailers for these. They are, of course, on the Virtual Console. They're on the website. They're in the news section of the Nintendo Switch. And these are kind of well-written descriptions of each game. So I'm going to go ahead and read the description for the original Donkey Kong Land. Okay?
Okay.
All right. And like I said, this was written 2015, but it's still relevant. All right. And this isn't text from 1995 either. This is text that was written 20 years after that. So this is Nintendo's reinterpretation of the original story. Cranky Kong doesn't think Donkey Kong has proven himself to be a hero yet. So he decides to work out a deal with the closest villain that he knows. K. Rool and his baddies have hidden bananas in new places across Donkey Kong Island in another attempt to outwit the best friend duo. And the only response is for Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong to go off on another adventure. With over 30 levels plus tons of hidden secrets, swing, roll, jump, and barrel blast through worlds swarming with returning and original enemies. Creep along a mysterious pirate ship, trudge through fierce snow, swim in an unbelievable aquatic temple, and start some crazy capers in the sky. There will also be some animal friends waiting to help out. Cranky Kong is off his rocker if he thinks Donkey Kong won't step up to the challenge. That's great writing right there, Malik. What that is wordplay.
Yeah.
And I love to see it.
Yeah, they tricked me. When I read that again on the Switch Online, I was like, I gotta make sure this isn't on the back of the Game Boy box. I was like, oh wow, actual thought. Who would have thought?
So a little bit of a sleight of hand there, because the core crux of the Donkey Kong Land plot is that Cranky Kong isn't impressed with their victory in Donkey Kong Country because he thinks that the state-of-the-art graphics carried them. Like, he thinks that the only reason the game sold is because the graphics were good. Basically, the apocryphal Miyamoto quotes. That's Cranky Kong in the Donkey Kong Land story. So, what Nintendo did here is they kind of slightly removed the reference to, you can't do that again on the Game Boy on a crap 8-bit system, you pieces of shit. They kind of just got rid of that and just made it a generalized challenge to, like, do it again, which I guess kind of makes sense in the context of 2015 or 2024. But yeah, that's the core element of the Donkey Kong Land plot. It's very meta, and it's Cranky basically saying, I won't be impressed until you do this on the Game Boy, because that's the only current Nintendo system I give any validity towards.
Mm-hmm. So let's see you do this on a piece of garbage,
Right,
relatively speaking.
Oh, yeah. So, Malik, I'm sorry, you're going to have to read the most uninteresting of the three.
That's okay.
The Donkey Kong Land 2 story.
Yeah, I'll still do it with passion. Let's see. K. Rool has kidnapped Donkey Kong, and he's demanding the entire banana horde as ransom. It's up to Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong to rescue their kidnapped pal. Play as either Kong and take advantage of their unique abilities. Diddy Kong's cartwheel can take out the bulkiest of baddies, while Dixie Kong's helicopter spin will let you hover over some tricky spots. There's also a wild assortment of friendly animals ready to help out the two little Kongs. There are over 40 levels to complete, each filled with special traps, collectibles, dastardly Kremlings, and a boatload of barrels to blast out of.
Yeah, it's the Donkey Kong Country 2 story, but again.
Mm-hmm. They didn't mention the part where Lockjaw Saga plays every other level.
I really hope that people who are playing it for the very first time on NSO realize that themselves, and they realize that it wasn't necessarily me being cruel when we did our Spotlight episode way back when on Donkey Kong Land 2 to play Lockjaw's saga underneath the entire episode. That's just the game.
I know, like when I was playing it on the Switch, I took a break for maybe like a couple days, and the last level I played had Lockjaw Saga, and then I play a new level, and Lockjaw Saga starts up again. I'm like slowly in the fetal position, like, oh my god, just give me a new song.
The terrible thing is it gets stuck in your head then, and not just Lockjaw Saga, but the Game Boy Grant Kirkhope rendition of it, which that's not shade meant towards Grant Kirkhope. It's just you get the tinier version of it. All right, I'll read Donkey Kong Land 3's plot. Will you be the one to uncover the secrets of the Lost World? Fame and fortune seekers have journeyed far and wide just in search of the fabled Lost World. Eager to find it first, Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong set off to discover its entrance, unaware that Baron K. Rulenstein and his Kremling crew are hot on their tail. Meanwhile, Dixie Kong is left behind to babysit her younger cousin, Kiddy Kong, but that won't stop her from answering the call of adventure. Help Dixie Kong and Kiddy Kong through 36 Kremling-infested levels, each containing their own secret areas and bonus levels. While Dixie Kong's helicopter spin is useful for hovering away from obstacles, Kiddy Kong's somersault allows you to roll over land and jump farther after rolling off ledges. Animal friends are back to help, and there are plenty of collectibles and items to find along the way. Help the adventuring duo be the first to uncover the entrance to the secret Lost World. So, I just want to point out that some people over the years, including DK Vine staffer Joe Mudd, have believed that DK Vine made up that story for Donkey Kong Land 3. And I'm like, no, that's the actual story for Donkey Kong Land 3. Like, that isn't us doing a fan wank like we did for Donkey Kong Land 2 to make it work in the greater continuity of Donkey Kong. That's just the story to Donkey Kong Land 3. It's Donkey and Diddy are being little misogynist towards Dixie, and Dixie's trying to prove them wrong by, like, finding the Lost World before the other, like, adventurers looking for the Lost World. This other Lost World of the Northern Hemisphere that's not the Lost World of Krematoa. They already found that, but there's another Lost World. It's the least interesting Lost World out of all the Lost Worlds. Don't worry about it. It just down this drain pipe. Kind of sucks, but
maybe it was lost for a reason.
Right. It should have stayed lost, quite honestly. Sometimes the mystery is greater and more tantalizing than the actual answer to it, right? It's like stop and swap. You're left to speculate, and it's a lot more interesting than the real result. But anyway, yeah, it's wild to see, too, that they used the Kremling crew in that description, which is a term that wasn't in vogue until Super Smash Brothers. Was it Melee or is it Brawl that popularized that term for the Kremling army? Anyway, nice to see.
Like I'm going to say Melee, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Melee. Yeah. So, yeah, just I wanted to read those just to tell everyone what the stories are to the Donkey Kong Land games, for those who don't know, that they are different except for Donkey Kong Land 2, and that they are worthy of your time.
Yeah, I would say all three of them are worthy of your time, if not just to see. Land 2 for me is probably the lowest of them, but
sure,
I would still play through them all, and just to get a perspective. I was like, yeah, this is kind of cool.
Yeah, and even if you are not one to really get into the story, you know, the lore of Donkey Kong, that doesn't interest you. They are all unique level layouts. It's not like Donkey Kong Land 2, even though it covers a lot of the same ground as Donkey Kong Country 2. It's not like you're not getting unique experiences in those levels. You are. So it's just, you have to kind of overcome this is just Donkey Kong Country 2, but a little worse.
Yeah.
It's still more Donkey Kong Country 2. Yeah. You can think of it like that. It's more Donkey Kong Country 2 elements. Donkey Kong Country 2 widely held up as the favorite Donkey Kong Country game. So here, you get a little bit more of that.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. It'll get you through it.
Right. It's like squeezing a dirty dish rag dry. It's the last little drops of filthy water.
I like that analogy. I'll be thinking about that next time I wash the dishes. I'll be thinking of Donkey Kong Land 2.
It also helps you get through washing the dishes. It's just...
Yep. Yeah. You're thinking of Lockjaw Saga when your hands are in the water.
So I want to compare notes here, Malik, because I want to know what your preferred way to view these games on the NSO Game Boy player are. Because on the Game Boy Virtual Console, you can choose one of 3 screens. And you can always go back and switch back and forth if one's not to your liking. It's not like you're stuck once you select. But this is all done in the settings of the home screen for the Game Boy player. You can choose, and I think this is the default, you can choose the original Game Boy screen, which is just that hideous pea soup green muck. It's disgusting. And I'm like, we left this behind in like 1995 for a reason. When the Game Boy Pocket came out, like... This should be a relic because this is just an atrocious way to view any of these games. It does them a disservice, in my opinion. I understand historical fidelity. I get that, but some things we can leave behind. Like,
yeah, please.
Polio we can leave behind, right? We're all in agreement there. We don't need to bring polio back. Yeah. Same thing with this visual aesthetic. It's disgusting.
Crime against nature.
The Game Boy Pocket screen is a sharper, more refined image that sheds the green. It simulates the Game Boy Pocket's more crystal clear LCD screen, which really impressed me as a kid. I didn't have a Game Boy Pocket, and my friend Elliot did. And like, just looking at it, I was like, whoa, like these games look all right.
Yeah, they do look all right.
And then, of course, you've got the Game Boy Color screen, which the Game Boy Color screen mixes in color between characters, items, and the background. Kind of helps make everything stand out, even for games that weren't natively designed to use the Game Boy Color hardware.
Yeah, so let's see. If I had to pick one, I personally like the Game Boy Color variant, but when I played them on 3DS, when they came out, they only had Pea Soup and the Game Boy Pocket variants, and since I had grown up playing Donkey Kong Land 1 on the Super Game Boy, the Game Boy Pocket was extremely depressing to me. And I was like, there's no jungle green background, there's no colors, it's all black, white, and gray.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that's what I did with all 3 of those games, and I lived through it, but it was very depressing for me personally. But I really like playing with the Game Boy Color variant because I have only seen that like maybe over other people's shoulders, but growing up, but this is the first time I'm getting to experience this myself with the Game Boy Color variant, and I really like it. You can see everything properly, and yeah, even the Super Game Boy stuff that didn't really help with like especially the first game when it came to how detailed the backgrounds everything are, and you kind of get lost in everything. But yeah, Game Boy Color is my way to go, and I really don't want to do anything else with the other filters because they make me very sad.
Yeah, like you, Malik, when the Donkey Kong Land trilogy was new, I would play them a bit on my old brick Game Boy, But generally speaking, it would only be like a little taste. Like, I just want to experience it on the Game Boy. Okay, I did that. Now let me put it in my Super Game Boy, in my Super Nintendo, and play it on the TV. Because that was the best way to experience the Donkey Kong Land trilogy. Whenever I hear people complain about like how overly detailed the backgrounds are in Donkey Kong Land, and you can't see the characters, especially like in those early jungle stages. It's like, yeah, you stick it in this Super Game Boy and you're fine. Like, it's definitely like the only real way to learn the ropes. Like back in 1995, back before the Game Boy Pocket was a thing, or the Game Boy Color, like the only way you could really, I think, appreciate these games and learn where everything is the Super Game Boy. And yeah, you got those great borders too. Those unique borders for each one. Donkey Kong Land had that palm tree border, the Donkey Kong Country palm trees, those classic plasticky looking, artificial ass palm trees that like showed up through Donkey Kong 64. Like Donkey Kong 64 utilized that for like some menu backgrounds, and it was just like, yeah, you know, I love to see those.
Make me feel safe.
yeah, I know. It's my happy place. Donkey Kong Land 2. I love Donkey Kong Land 2's though. It had the banana border, which I don't know if these were
gives me anxiety.
Really?
Just a tad, because it looks like the bananas are raining down on me, and just the black tips are, I don't know. It's cool, but it also looks like I get claustrophobic looking at it. It's like, oh my god, there's so many bananas.
It's just clogging up all the oxygen. There's no air getting through.
Yep.
I don't know if these were uniquely made for Donkey Kong Land 2, but I think they look great. Just lovely ACM renders of bananas. I don't know. Love to see them. The weakest of the three, Donkey Kong Land 3, which utilized the stopwatches that were a collectible.
This one gives me anxiety.
Well, it's just, they utilized the stopwatches, which were a unique, bespoke collectible in Donkey Kong Land 3, which, okay, great, but it's like, what? Why would you choose that? Why not choose, like, I don't know, bear coins or
hemisphere? Yeah.
Yeah, like pine trees or something. Why stopwatches? This is ugly.
It's like there's nothing Donkey Kong about this. I don't like how the clocks are stacked on one another.
It's also interesting that, like, around the game screen itself, Donkey Kong Land had a like single row of bamboo around the screen. Donkey Kong Land 2 had wood, which I guess was kind of like a ship's mast. And then Donkey Kong Land 3 used double row of bamboo.
Huh. I wonder what that means.
I guess they like didn't make enough of the stopwatches, and so they had to fill the space with extra bamboo. Yeah. But I think that as much as I miss the Super Game Boy borders, like, I wish there was a way to emulate those in all subsequent releases. You know, I understand you can't. I understand it's not part of it unless it's, you know, on the Super Game Boy, but it was such a core component of the visual identity of those games for me that I do miss them. But that being said, playing them with this Game Boy Color screen on NSO, my God, I know it might be sacrilegious. I know it's not really a true one-to-one, like, this is the way it was in 1995 or 1996 or 1997, but it's kind of hard to go back after playing it with the Game Boy Color screen. It is a game changer.
Oh, heck yeah. Like I said, I can't go back to those other ones, man. It's gross. It's gross and ugly. But I love the color ones. And on the TV, it's great.
Yeah. It's also, I think it really like helps you appreciate the graphical fidelity of the like sprites and the like detail of the sprites to have them like sort of accentuated by the color. Like I was just marveling at some of the Donkey Kong Land sprites, like the swirl winds in the temples, like the little tornadoes that you bounce on.
Yeah.
And those always looked impressive to me, but really like having them pop with that little flourish of color, I was just like, damn, this game was very, very impressive for 1995.
Yeah, and it only took until 1999-ish for us to really see that.
Yeah, yeah. Like I was debating, like, do I keep like gathering screenshots and everything, like record new footage with his Game Boy Color filter? Like, is that heresy? And I'm still kind of undecided on that, but I think I am. That's what I'm leaning towards, just because it is very hard to go back. I even tried going back to the Game Boy Pocket screen, and I was just like, yeah, no, this is now missing something.
Yeah. When I made my Donkey Kong Land Trilogy video, I was to go back to the borders, and I was like, should I change the borders every time I talk about a different game? And I'm like, no, I don't. And I think the clock border is really what ticked me off, if you shall, if you will. So I was like, let's just use the old jungle border because I like that one.
Yeah.
But that was all. I would like to see them on Switch Online because I don't think Nintendo has a good excuse to not give us Super Game Boy functionality.
I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to how the Super Game Boy works with the like actual software and hardware and like what you need to emulate it. But yeah, it's a shame. I would love to, like, what I really want to do, right, is I want to have modern playthroughs of the games in like every visual presentation. So I would do the Game Boy Color filter, I might do the Game Boy Pocket filter, and then I would love a Super Game Boy run through, just to have that like border and to have that experience preserved for a new generation. But yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I just remember just as a child messing around with all the Super Game Boy like colors and borders, many of which I didn't know about until decades later. But it was just so much fun messing around with borders and clicking like the X and Y button and having the palettes change, even if it was like completely ugly to look at. I was like, hey, I changed it to like puke green or like purple. That's cool, right?
Yeah. I really, really wore out my Super Game Boy because, yeah, like even games that weren't optimized for Super Game Boy, you still worked in the Super Game Boy. And then, yeah, you could change the palettes and have, they weren't custom borders for those games, but you could add in borders. And yeah, it was just great. It was a lot of fun. It was the kind of thing when you're a kid, you can just waste hours and hours of your life on.
Mm-hmm.
So, but of course, we can't talk about color. We can't talk about the Game Boy Color, and we can't talk about Donkey Kong Land without addressing Ellie the elephant in the room here, which is there is a Game Boy Color Donkey Kong Land game, but it was exclusive for Japan. So Donkey Kong Land 3 never came out in Japan in the initial run. For whatever reason, they didn't release it in Japan. And maybe that was because of when the Game Boy Color came out. I don't know. But eventually, Rare got around to doing a unique, I guess, redo of Donkey Kong Land 3 for the Japanese market for the Game Boy Color. It was called, in Japan, Donkey Kong GB, Dinky Kong and Dixie Kong. Dinky Kong, of course, Kiddy Kong's name in Japan. This came out in early 2000, I want to say February 2000. Only in Japan. Wasn't released anywhere else. And, yes, Donkey Kong GB, Dinky Kong, and Dixie Kong is the version that the Japanese market got on NSO last week. So, if you want to experience it yourself, you can play the 2000 Game Boy Color version of this game by switching your Switch's native region to Japan and then downloading the NSO GB player. Of course, it won't be translated for you. So, like, Wrinkly Kong will be speaking to you in Japanese. But you can experience it very easily from the comfort of whatever receptacle you are sitting on. Maybe the toilet, for example. So, there are pluses and minuses to this version. I see a lot of people talking up this version like, well, it's the only version you would want to play because it's for the Game Boy Color. However, I don't know, Malik. I don't know. I kind of raised my eyebrow at this version just a little bit, and I think maybe you are the lesser version, Donkey Kong GB, Dinky Kong, and Dixie Kong. Maybe you kind of suck compared to the Western Donkey Kong Land 3. And yeah, maybe I'm a little bit biased because that's the version of Donkey Kong Land 3 I experienced, but the world maps are not animated in the GBC version. They are static. Whereas in the traditional Donkey Kong Land 3, you've got the water moving, you've got smoke, you've got like the mill going, you've got flashing lights coming from Wrinkly Refuge and the Sheepy Shop. It's a vibrant little map screen. Good. Yeah, vibrant little map screen Donkey Kong Land 3 has, and Donkey Kong GB, Dinky Kong, and Dixie Kong doesn't have that. That's so also weird. The bear character, who is visually Bizarre Bear, canonically it's disputed to what his identity is. Some people know him as Bear Bear, but Bear. We'll just say the bear character is not animated at all. He's just like frozen like Han Solo in Carbonite. It's like, what the hell is this? and here's my thing. Here's my thing. If you're going to disrespect what is absolutely the best Brothers Bear in Donkey Kong Land 3 by not having him animated because you just don't have the processing power for it, what is the point to this color version?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't see a point.
now look, obviously it is a curiosity for Western fans, and I can understand the appeal. Like, I admit, like, at one point, I was kind of hoping Nintendo would do an official English patch for the game and just release it on NSO or whatever. I can understand why they wouldn't waste resources on that, because who the fuck cares except freaks like us, but I don't know. I think the regular ass Donkey Kong Land 3, especially with the Game Boy Color filter, which doesn't add as much color than Donkey Kong GB, Dinky Kong, and Dixie Kong, but I think it's enough. Because here's the thing, Donkey Kong GB, Dinky Kong, Dixie Kong, I don't think looks that great for the Game Boy Color compared to Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color, which came out later that year. I think the characters just, they just have a splotch of color over them. They're not really that great. I don't know. It just doesn't do it for me, Malik.
I can understand where you're coming from that, but yeah, I I would like to give both. I'm currently playing Land 3 Game Boy Color not Game Boy Color a US Game Boy Color variant, yes. Not Japanese.
I understand.
But I'd like to give both a shot just to see which ones are, which ones I like more. Where it's like, oh, I like this. I kind of like this here.
Sure.
Yeah.
In a live stream, Freezer says, "Who cares about maps? Bear doesn't animate."
Exactly.
And yeah, we addressed that point, but yes, I like, clearly, if you are knee deep or even neck deep into Donkey Kong fandom, you're gonna care about a Brothers Bear appearing in the game, and then you want the best possible presentation for that Brothers Bear.
Mm-hmm.
And Freezer also has a great point. You can't get the funny Donkey Kong Land 3 level names if you play the game in the Japanese Game Boy Color version. And yeah, that's one of the, I think, huge selling points of Donkey Kong Land 3 is the absolute top-notch level pun names that they came up with for Donkey Kong Land
Mhm.
3. Of course, you've got Coco Channel, which is my absolute favorite in any Donkey Kong game. That is just such a, like, that's almost Frasier level writing right there. And then, of course, Miller Instinct is another one that people bandy about. Red Wharf is the very first level of the game. So, yeah, that's definitely an important component to Donkey Kong Land 3. But
The world names too. I like Black Forest Plateau. That just sounds so good.
I didn't know what a Black Forest Gâteau is.
Just
that
think
it?
of ham. Oh no, I just think of ham when I think Black Forest.
Oh no, it's a cake. It's a cake. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what like half the puns. I didn't know what half the puns were when I played Donkey Kong Land 3 the first time around. And so like when I learned who Coco Chanel was, I was just like, a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, Donkey Kong Land 3, I get it now. when I learned the show Red Dwarf, which wasn't like widely known here in the States, but then like when DVDs were a thing and they started bringing over all these UK shows, I saw that and I was like, Red Dwarf. Oh.
I was thinking of Constellations, but I think that's White Dwarf.
White Dwarf is a star. It's
yeah.
Star stage, yeah.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. So, Malik, this is the portion of the podcast where we're going to go over some details that the common folk may not know. We're going to call it Donkey Kong Land Trilovia, which is Donkey Kong Land Trilogy Trivia. It's a little portmanteau.
I was about to say, it sounds perverted. but
well,
it's not.
I mean, anything discussing this era of Rare probably borders on the perverted. Let's be honest. But
of course,
there's a lot of interesting little facts about the Donkey Kong Land games that might be lost to time. But this, of course, is just a very, very cursory overlook. There's a lot of details we're not going to get into. And look, we've done a lot of episodes about Donkey Kong Land in the 12-year history of the Kongversation. We've done spotlights, we've done anniversary retrospectives, we've gotten deep into Donkey Kong Land in the past. So this is just kind of your introductory glimpse into everything to know about Donkey Kong Land. Think of it as Donkey Kong Land 101. I don't mean the percentages you can get, because you can't get 101% in the original Donkey Kong Land, Malik. It's 100%. It's capped.
Right,
okay.
Right.
So here's something you might not know. The Donkey Kong Land trilogy was sort of a training ground for a lot of talent at Rare, and some of the talent that's now at Playtonic. We heavily associate the first Donkey Kong Land game with Paul Makachek, because he was the programmer, he kind of headed up the project, but Andrew Collard was credited for game design on that original Donkey Kong Land. Now, Andrew Collard would go on to then be Greg Mayles', I don't want to say understudy, but he kind of was the understudy to Greg Mayles on Donkey Kong Country 2. He did additional design on DKC 2 before taking over the series completely with Donkey Kong Country 3. So he kind of worked his way up the ranks there, and as I just discussed on the episode I did with Courtney on Donkey Kong 64, Andrew Collard was originally heading up Donkey Kong 64 before the game was completely rebooted behind the scenes in 1998 to be like Banjo-Kazooie but bigger, or Banjo-Kazooie but worse, depending on your point of view. But Andrew Collard was doing DK64, designing it to be more of a successor to the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, but in 3D. And ultimately didn't get to really carry out that vision. But yeah, like he was basically like taking over the reins for Greg Mayles when Greg went on to do Banjo-Kazooie and got us started on Donkey Kong Land.
What an unsung hero he is.
I would love to have him on the conversation. I really would. Like, we just had Paul Makachek a few months back on the conversation, which was a treat. It was a delight. I have so many more people I would love to have on.
You just got to track the man down.
Got to track him down. I've got to hire a bounty hunter for some of these people.
Do it.
Do it.
It's for the greater good. They'll understand.
Lee Schuneman, Malik, was responsible for the game design on Donkey Kong Land 2. Now, you might know that name, you might not, because Lee Schuneman would go on to head up a little title that would come out about a year later, called Diddy Kong Racing, and served as the director of Star Fox Adventures as well.
That's pretty good. I mean,
yeah,
I really liked half of what he did, and I thought the other half was pretty all right.
Well, so long as you think it's pretty all right, I'll accept that.
I appreciate what it does.
so long as you're not like that GameStop employee who tried to talk me out of reserving.
Nah.
Okay, all right.
That dude sucks.
I
hope he's playing Donkey Kong Land in pea soup on his old Game Boy.
I'm just going to say I hope he's dead.
I wasn't going to say that. I was thinking it, but I wasn't going to say it out loud.
For all you know, I hired a bounty hunter to take him out.
Do it. You're doing it for the greater good.
No, I don't wish ill towards him or anybody. So, yeah, Lee Schuneman really like made his mark on Donkey Kong Land 3. Gary Richards was responsible for the game design on Donkey Kong Land 3, alongside Hugh Ward. Now, they had both done additional design for Schuneman on Donkey Kong Land 2. Gary Richards would become a cornerstone of the Rare handheld team in particular, because Gary Richards would go to do design on Conker's Pocket Tales, Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance Remake Trilogy, Saberwolf, Diddy Kong Racing DS, and Viva Pinata Pocket Paradise. Now, he's currently at Playtonic, and he's widely credited as one of the key creative minds behind Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, which is, I think, thought of by many fans, many DKU fans, as one of the greatest 2D platformers ever made. At least by me, and at least by some fellow DK Vine staffers. But, yeah, Gary Richards.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, Gary Richards, Donkey Kong Land 3, kind of where he's really able to flex his creative muscle. So,
good man.
Talking about composers really quick, Graham Norgate did the original music for Donkey Kong Land, which Graham Norgate dismisses his work on Donkey Kong Land. You know, he'll usually say, all the good music was composed by David Wise. I just reinterpreted it. But Graham Norgate did some original music on Donkey Kong Land, and I think they're bops, Malik. I think they are, like, really, really catchy and earwormy. Some of the most infectious music ever composed for the Donkey Kong series. Now, Graham Norgate didn't stick with the Donkey Kong series for long. He contributed to Killer Instinct soundtrack around the same time, would go on to do Blast Core. He is credited for sound effects for Diddy Kong Racing. But he's probably most known for his work on GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. And he would be part of the team that would then leave Rare to form Free Radical in the year 2000.
I gotta say, I love his work across KI, Blast Core, Donkey Kong Land. I used the girder theme in a high school project in film class, and because I thought it just sounded so cool. And this was like in 2011, 2012, but so good.
They really work for Donkey Kong Land and for its environments. And yeah, he doesn't get enough credit. And, you know, when we talk about the Rare composers, David Wise and Grant Kirkhope, they're always like mentioned first and foremost. Robin Beanland is always brought up by those in the know, and Evelyn Novakovic is brought up by Donkey Kong fans in the know. Graham Norgate is kind of not brought up a lot, and that's probably because of Donkey Kong Land's lesser stature throughout the last 29 years. But yeah, Graham Norgate, he's fantastic. We have a rotating site slogan when you load up dkvine.com. And it's, I guess Graham Norgate is the Ringo, just because he is, his contributions are dismissed. But my argument as a Beatles fan is that the Beatles would not be the Beatles without Ringo Starr. He brought a lot to every song. He should not be dismissed because he only wrote 2 songs.
I just know him because lots of people like doing his voice in cartoons, and I really like it.
Yeah.
That's why I like Ringo.
Yeah, he wrote Octopus's Garden, and Graham Norgate wrote the Blimp music, and I think they're equitable. I think that Graham Norgate is the Ringo, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I'll listen to that Octopus song, and I'll think of the Blimp theme.
Of course, I mentioned Grant Kirkhope. Grant Kirkhope also got his start at Rare, rearranging David Wise's Donkey Kong Country 2 soundtrack for Donkey Kong Land 2. That's where Grant Kirkhope got his in. And of course, he would go on then to flourish. In relatively short order, he became like the go-to composer at Rare throughout the N64 years. So, yeah. Donkey Kong Land Trilogy was really the training ground for a lot of key creative talent that would go on to really help like shore up the DKU and Rare's portfolio throughout like the next decade plus.
Yeah, and I also want to give like a mention to Donkey Kong Land 3 soundtrack, because that was actually done by, converted by Evelyn Novakovic, who also did the lion's share of DKC3 on SNES. And then I just want to, it's so great how she converted those songs, and they have like a whole different vibe to them on Game Boy, where it's like what you heard of the Riverbank theme or the map theme, it is not the same, where it's like it's very, very similar, but the map theme is so good. It's like it makes you want to like fist bump in the air because there's like some crazy good beats to it, or the Riverbank is a little slower, and it's great. I recommend giving those a listen. If you thought DKC3's soundtrack was a little too like, quiet and reserved, you have to give the Game Boy versions a listen, because they might be more up your alley in terms of like bombastic and like melodic. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to use all the music terminology I can, but I'm not a music man. It sounds good. Music sound good.
And it's one of those rare instances where it's the composer, the original composer, actually like converting their own work for the Game Boy counterpart. And it's a completely different vibe that you get from like what's structurally the same songs.
Yeah, I love that.
Here's a little bit of trivia for you, Malik. Donkey Kong Land's original worlds have all arguably returned or been referenced in later games. Now, this might be a little bit contentious for some people. They might say this is just Hyle fan and bullshit, but stick with me. So, of course, the Gangplank Galleon, which factored heavily into the first world of Donkey Kong Land. It's called Gangplank Galleon Ahoy, even though only like a couple of the stages and the boss battle take place on the Gangplank Galleon. But the Gangplank Galleon admittedly debuted in Donkey Kong Country as the setting for the final boss fight with King K. Rool. But the Gangplank Galleon, you first had levels on it in Donkey Kong Land, and that would, of course, then form the basis of the first worlds of both Country 2 and Land 2. Kremlantis, the second world of the game, was more or less a retcon of the Kremlin temples seen in Donkey Kong Country. It was basically like giving further context to what these Kremlin temples were while they were part of the ancient lost civilization of Kremlantis, this Kremlin empire of antiquity. Now, Kremlantis, that was called back to in the Game Boy Advance version of Donkey Kong Country, where they like showed more Kremlantian structures going off Vine Valley into the island just off Donkey Kong Island, which we might define as Utan Island from the German Donkey Kong 64 website, but that's a whole different story. For more on that, see the recent Destination DKU Vine Valley episode that Dustin and I did. But the Donkey Kong Racing trailer from the year 2001 had a sequence where Diddy and Tiny Kong raced swordfish in this underwater civilization. And if you squint, if you look in the background, you'll see Kremlantis statues of critters in this like sunken kingdom. So it's Kremlantis in Donkey Kong Racing. It's going to factor into it. What a shame. What a shame we didn't get it. But Monkey Mountains, the third world, and Big Ape City, the fourth world of the game, can both arguably be seen from the beach in Donkey Konga 2. Yes, I'm referencing Donkey Konga 2 again, because Donkey Konga 2 what was set arguably in both locations. There's a city location that the bulk of the game takes place in, like the menus and everything. And like you go into the Hall of Records and it's like all these like ape statues in there. And yeah, that's probably Big Ape City. And the mountain right next to it would then be Monkey Mountains. So a little interesting. Of course, Big Ape City was established as the setting of the original Donkey Kong arcade game from 1981. This was based on Donkey Kong 94's Big City, which loosely retconned the setting of Donkey Kong 1981 as Big City, and then Rare extrapolated that as Big Ape City, which is a pun on the Big Apple. Now, in the years since, there have been some other suggested settings for the original Donkey Kong arcade game. Donkey Kong Country Returns Factory has a little, like, facsimile of the original, like, first level of Donkey Kong 1981 in the background. And, of course, Super Mario Odyssey introduces New Donk City. So some people say, well, is New Donk City the same as Big Ape City? And that's a whole other debate, Malik. But just know that Donkey Kong Land did it first. And in my opinion, I really, really like what Donkey Kong Land did, recontextualizing the setting of Donkey Kong Arcade. Like, I love those girder levels. I love taking the visual imagery of Donkey Kong 1981 and basically making it look a little bit more modern, a little bit more realistic.
Yeah, like even people who are playing, I've seen some people who have played Donkey Kong Land for the first time in more recent years, and they get the vibe of like, hey, they're paying homage to the original Donkey Kong from 1981, and they're not, nut jobs like you and me. So it's like, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, like I miss this time when you didn't just like plop the like original girder aesthetic down without like updating it. Like, I love that it's just like, no, we're not going to make these like neon pink girders. Like, granted, this was the Game Boy, so they don't have color, but they're just like these real dirty construction sites. I love it.
Yeah, nice and unsanitary.
Like dirty dish rag water.
Dirty dish rag water, Gorilla Drip.
Now, if we're to align the locations of the worlds based off of Donkey Konga 2, like I said, and you kind of look at the map of Donkey Kong Island in several games, then Chimpanzee Clouds, which is part of the Monkey Mountains world, and factors into 3 levels in that world. The world itself is called Monkey Mountains and Chimpanzee Clouds. That is roughly in the same location as Fungi Forest in Donkey Kong 64, Cranky's Temple and Temple Heights in Donkey Kong Barrel Blast / Jet Race, and Secret Seclusion in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Now that game, Malik, established that it was the Snowmads who had raised this chunk of Donkey Kong Island to float in the clouds, because you can see their runes, their glowing runes are on everything, right? So, was this an intentional callback? I don't know, but it kind of serves as this nice explanation for all of this floating landmass off the coast of Donkey Kong Island. It's factored into several games at this point. And we do know that Retro Studios played the Donkey Kong Land trilogy when doing their research for Donkey Kong Country Returns. They said they played the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy, the Donkey Kong Land trilogy, and they included little flourishes in both Returns and Tropical Freeze that does suggest an influence direct from the Donkey Kong Land games. Now, Hearts return in Donkey Kong Country Returns for the first time since Donkey Kong Land 3. Now, in the Donkey Kong Land games, of course, they serve as your life meter to show you how many lives you have. In Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze, they are merely the extra hit health meter. Now, this is a little tangent, this is a little side note, but why the hearts in Donkey Kong Land? Why did they use hearts when it's so atypical from the rest of the Donkey Kong series? The Donkey Kong Country series never incorporated hearts. Why are they strung across the bottom? Why not just have a little life meter that pops up whenever you die?
Mm-hmm.
What? Well, it's because it's a carryover from Battletoads for the Game Boy, which Paul Makachek also worked on. Donkey Kong Land just uses a modified Battletoads engine. And so one of the things Paul Makachek carried over was that little life meter at the bottom. And he just kind of tweaked it a little bit and just left it in. And it just became a reoccurring visual motif in the Donkey Kong Land trilogy.
I like that. Maybe his thought process, aside from them being on, the same engine or whatever, it's they both have hearts. The frogs and gorillas have hearts. Why not?
they're living organisms, right? If you dissect them, you would find a heart.
Yeah, you might find 3 depending on the creature, but yeah.
The mole miners in Donkey Kong Country Returns, which will be referenced in the Minecart Madness roller coaster coming this Wednesday in Japan, and featured in the Lego Super Mario Donkey Kong sets from last year, they seem to be visually based off of the boss of Monkey Mountains, Hardhat the Mole.
I got behind this back in 2010 where it's hey, there was that one mole in Returns with a big old miner's hat on. And I was I like to think about that. And maybe he was from this civilization of the mole people.
Portals, which serve as the end level goals in each Donkey Kong Land level from the original game, they return in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, and they serve as the gateway to the alternate exits in select stages. Now, in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, they're once again recontextualized as powered by Snowmad runes, which might provide an elegant retcon to why portals exist in Donkey Kong Land in the first place.
Sure, why not?
But you can clearly see that a lot from that first Donkey Kong Land game influenced Retro across their 2 Donkey Kong Country games, which is just kind of fun to see. You can make these direct correlations because we know they did play it. We know that it did leave kind of a big impression on them that they were able to draw as much as they did from Donkey Kong Land.
I need to find the interview where they said that, because I know they did say that, but I'm having a dickens of a time trying to relocate that thing.
Same.
Just so if people ask.
I remember from 2010 that interview, but I cannot find it for the life of me. It's fallen off the face of the earth.
Ugh, no, we'll find. One of us will find it.
I hope it's not a Mandela effect and they only gave it in the universe we're from before we timeline shifted.
I can't do that. I put it in a Did You Know Gaming. It has to be real. Otherwise, I'm going to look bad.
I know. Fruit of the Loom cornucopia all over again. So,
oh God.
One of Donkey Kong Land's lasting legacies, at least among the hardcore fans, is its scrapped characters. And this is probably trivia that even the biggest outsider to the DKL trilogy will probably know. Rambunctious, the ram was a planned animal buddy for Donkey Kong Land. Paul Mackchek, in fact, brought this up in our interview with him a few months back. Just this cute little baby ram, giant horns that you're going to ride on the back. Ultimately didn't make it into the final game, but was earmarked for the game at one point. Now, a character who was probably never going to be in the game and was just the DKL team kind of flexing their muscle with the SGI machines was the Kong wearing a dashing hat, which has gone by several names in the fandom over the years. You get City Kong, you get Hat Kong, which I've never liked. Hat Kong, really?
That's my favorite. Hat Kong.
Hat Kong. I personally like Commuter Kong. And look, there's nothing tying this Kong to Big Ape City other than he's wearing a hat and he's shown up in like resources for the game that has Big Ape City. But I think we just like this idea that he's just a big city Kong, you know, going about his day. He wears a hat and nothing else. Like, he's completely naked except for the hat.
His latissimus dorsi seems to have been imploded as well.
All right.
You know,
all right,
the area
now.
around the chest. You see it, right?
I see it. I see it. He's got.
It's like malnourished or something.
Yeah, he's also got the big Audi belly button.
K. Rool has that too, but that's a belly button. That's button on emphasis on button.
So of course, this is one of the Kongs that shows up from time to time, along with Redneck Kong. In fact, I love pairing this Kong with Redneck Kong, like country and city, you know, rural and urban. Just, you know,
yeah,
like what a pair they make. But at DK Vine, we use this Kong render as the image that appears in any quoted piece in any news article we do. We have this Kong. I think it was Matt who put the little press badge in his hat, and he's holding the microphone, which is actually Micro Buffer from Donkey Kong 64. But yeah, whenever we have a quoted image in our news articles, this Kong appears as like, look, he works for the press. He's quoting somebody.
He sounds like he would sound like Edward G. Robinson.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, it's like, yeah. So what can you tell us about this? See, meow.
Yeah. Well, that's Trouser from off of Ukulele.
Yeah. I hear it.
They both have hats.
They both have hats. That qualifies you.
Of course, unlike Trouser, Commuter Kong does not wear any.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most Kongs don't wear pants or trousers, to be fair, but
Redneck wore overalls. Those aren't pants.
No. I mean, he's got to protect his private areas around all the heavy machinery, like the tractors and the threshers and whatnot.
I guess.
Yeah. All right. Here's a little bit of trivia that might help people struggling with Donkey Kong Land right now, Malik.
Yeah.
The level Sky High Caper is the most reviled stage in probably any of the original Donkey Kong country era games, right? Sky High Caper, for those who don't know, it's the second Chimpanzee Clouds level in Monkey Mountains and Chimpanzee Clouds. It's probably the most difficult stage to get a handle on because it plays so differently compared to any of the rare era Donkey Kong levels. It's the stage where you are on this moving platform, and every time you jump, the platform changes direction.
I don't like this one at all. This killed me so much back in the day.
This was an inordinately difficult stage to play when I was a kid. I spent the better part of a day struggling, and I remember the panic setting in. I was like, not going to be able to beat this stage. I'm not going to be able to finish Donkey Kong Land. I don't see how this is possible. And it requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of Zen-like thinking, like, okay, calm down. You're overreacting to everything. You only jump when it's necessary. Try to roll through enemies when you can. Don't roll off the platform. You know, it requires a lot of delicate nuance. And when you are a kid, or even just an adult jumping into Donkey Kong Land for the first time, it's very, very hard to get a handle on. But there is salvation, Malik, because now this won't help you if you're 100% like getting all the bonus areas, right? Now that's not necessary to really beating Donkey Kong Land to begin with. You're not going to get a Lost World in Donkey Kong Land. There's not a secret ending to getting 100%. That's just there for bragging rights. But if you need to get through Sky High Caper, and you absolutely cannot beat it all the way through, there is a hidden portal, a hidden exit portal at the very beginning of the stage. All you have to do is that first, cloud platform before you get on the moving platform area. Just roll down and fall just directly underneath the cloud. There's a portal right there that will take you out of level. It will count as you beating the level.
I did not know this.
I discovered it in 1995 by mistake because I was so flustered, constantly dying. I couldn't even get to the checkpoint. And I remember I just hit the roll button and I fell backwards. And I was like, damn it. And then I beat the level. And I was like, what? And I went back in and tried it again. I was like, did the game glitch? And no, sure enough, I did it again. I don't know if Paul Makachek or whomever stuck this there during testing because they couldn't be asked to beat their own insidiously developed level. And Paul Makachek just said on Blue Sky the other day, this is the level he's most disappointed in. He doesn't like how it plays either. But yeah, it's in there. I don't know if it was a legitimate secret that was purposely left in for people who were struggling with this and just happened to fall, or if it was just there for testing and they never took it out. But yes, there is an escape hatch in Sky High Caper.
I'll have to give that I'll give that a look the next time I'm playing that level, because yeah, that is a level that definitely needs it. Don't like it.
I did test it out on the NSO version just to make sure it still works. It wasn't just exclusive to the original 1.0 release of Donkey Kong Land, and no, it's still in there. So
that's good.
Here's another thing you might not realize if you're jumping into Donkey Kong Land, being more well acquainted with Donkey Kong Country. Espresso is hugely overpowered in Donkey Kong Land. Espresso is able to stomp on baddies, unlike in Donkey Kong Country. But not just that. If the baddies are just in Espresso's path, if they're not jumping, if they're not the critters that jump at you, if they're just walking towards you, Espresso can just run into them and mow them down. Espresso is
like a real ostrich.
Yeah, Espresso has legs of steel in Donkey Kong Land. And in fact, this was referenced in the Super Smash Brothers. It was either Brawl or 4. I'm really forgetting my Smash Brothers trophy description minutia here, Malik. But it was referenced in one of Espresso's descriptions in one of those games. And it said, yeah, by the time of Donkey Kong Land, he had stronger legs. That fact was made somewhat more canon by the reference in Smash. So
I like that. He did not skip leg day, as the kids say.
Yeah, so I like to think my headcanon at the time was that Espresso, by participating in Donkey Kong Country, his legs did get stronger. And so by the time of Donkey Kong Land, he could just completely demolish any Kremlin crew baddies in his way. And in fact, Espresso is better than Rambi in Donkey Kong Land. Espresso is my favorite of the two, and it's just a shame we don't get to play with him as much as, we do. He only really factors into very little in Donkey Kong Land, and then he shows up in some of the bonus areas as well, but...
Yeah, and those are over in like an instant.
Right,
Espresso definitely gets his time to shine in Land.
I mean, the handheld games of Rare really gave Espresso his due, because there was Espresso Racing in the Donkey Kong Country 2 Game Boy Advance remake, and of course, his Banjo Pilot cameo.
Banjo Pilot.
Yeah. Of course,
I like it, though.
Many people know this, but all Donkey Kong Land games were released in a banana yellow cartridge. It was just promoted on that first game, but all three of them had the banana yellow cartridge. And this is kind of a false memory implanted in some people, because a lot of people remember the Donkey Kong Country trilogy having the banana yellow cartridges. It was Donkey Kong Land that had them, and then of course Donkey Kong 64 had a slightly different shade of yellow on its cartridge, but it too had a yellow cartridge. But yeah, it wasn't the country games that had the yellow cartridges, it was the Land games, and I love those, Malik. I really loved whenever you would have that colored plastic that wasn't just the gray, the traditional gray. It was always like a treat. It was like, oh wow, this is special.
Yeah, like when I look at my old Pokemon games, like I have a little cardboard box of all my Game Boy games, and I can tell I got two yellows. One's Pokemon Yellow, the other is Donkey Kong Land. It's like, oh, there they are.
Killer Instinct for the Super Nintendo had that all black cartridge. Of course, Zelda would have the gold cartridges, although they were more limited runs on those. And then I think for some reason, the Spider-Man game Maximum Carnage on the Super Nintendo had an all-red cartridge.
Yeah, pretty sure it did.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
But just, it's like, oh man, why don't they do this more often? This is
they need
a treat.
To, yeah. Give me a Switch cartridge that's banana yellow and is banana scented.
Scratch
Remember
and
when
sniff.
everyone was eating their Switch cartridges?
Yeah.
Make it tantalizing.
In the Americas, Donkey Kong Land 2 came out on the same day as the Nintendo 64.
I like that. It's like, it's a divisive of 8, right? Yeah, sorta.
Sort of, yeah. I remember, and I always bring this up, getting Donkey Kong Land 2 the very day it came out, and just smirking because I clearly made the better choice, because there were no DKU games on the N64 yet. So it was just like, why would I want to get Super Mario 64 or Pilot Wings 64 when I can get Donkey Kong Land 2? I'm the smart consumer here.
Yeah, I won't argue with you.
Now, Donkey Kong Land 2 uses a completely new engine from Donkey Kong Land. As I already mentioned, Donkey Kong Land had a repurposed Battletoads engine that was reformatted for the Donkey Kong Country style gameplay. Donkey Kong Land 2 was built from the ground up by Robert Harrison. And so that's why it kind of feels a little bit different and maybe feels a little bit closer to the actual Donkey Kong Country style than Donkey Kong Land does. Like, yeah. Donkey Kong Land comes close, but you definitely jumping into it controls a little bit different. And you kind of have to get the hang of it for a few levels before you're really in the swing of things. And that can throw people who are so used to Donkey Kong Country. And, you go into Donkey Kong Land just expecting to play exactly the same. And it's just a little bit looser, a little bit off balance compared to that game. And it's fun once you do get the hang of it. But Donkey Kong Land 2 then, jumping into that, it doesn't control exactly the same way as Donkey Kong Land. And so it's just like, have to get used to this now as well.
Yeah, when I'm flip-flopping between the games on the Switch on the fly. And yeah, I noticed that. Where it's like, okay, Land 2 is a lot floatier. And yeah, Land 1... little, like I said in my video on the Donkey Kong Land trilogy, I would stress to call it Janky Kang Land or Janky Kong Land, but yeah, it can be a little jarring for those who don't know.
Yeah. And Donkey Kong Land 3 would reuse the Donkey Kong Land 2 engine, which gave them a little bit more creative freedom when designing that game, which is why it, I think, does a little bit more than just tries to recreate Donkey Kong Country 3. I don't think you could recreate Donkey Kong Country 3 and everything it did on the Game Boy, but I think
Certainly
part of the
not.
reason Donkey Kong Land 2 really just is a watered down Donkey Kong Country 2 for all intents and purposes is because it made the engine from the ground up.
Ironic, isn't it? It's like we got an all new engine, but everything else is, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
However, even though Donkey Kong Land 2 did kind of just repeat Donkey Kong Country 2, and yes, we at DK Vine, we found a way to fan wank it. Most people scoff at that, trough at it even, but
yeah,
there is some actual visual continuity between the two titles. Now, what am I talking about? The location of Donkey Kong Island in relation to Crocodile Isle is consistent, and you might be like, well, Hyle, of course it is, if they just reuse the same maps. Like, yes, Donkey Kong Island will still be seen from, say, K. Rool's Keep, and it's going to look the same. Why is that trivia? Well, it's trivia because in Donkey Kong Land 2, they have the Gangplank Galleon approaching from the other side of Crocodile Isle. So in Donkey Kong Country 2, right, the Gangplank Galleon, relative to Crocodile Isle on the map screen, it's on the left. And in Donkey Kong Land 2, the Gangplank Galleon is on Crocodile Isle's right. It approaches from a different side of the island. So in the Gangplank Galleon world, on the world map, you see Donkey Kong Island in the background. And that's visually consistent with K. Rool's Keep, right? Because K. Rool's Keep, you see Donkey Kong Island is on the left side in the background, which the Gangplank Galleon was on the left side in the map screen, and so you see Donkey Kong Island in the background there. However, Donkey Kong Island is not visible from the Gangplank Galleon map screen in Donkey Kong Land 2, because why would it be? Donkey Kong Island isn't on that side of Crocodile Isle. Ah.
This is a whole new adventure.
There's the proof right there. How could this be the same adventure if the Gangplank Galleon is on a different side? And look, there is proof. Donkey Kong Island isn't behind it. Because why would it be?
Why are we not talking about this more?
There's the next topic for Did You Know Gaming, Malik.
I know, right? I'm going to pitch this and I'm going to lose my job.
I would say DK Vine would hire you, but I don't have the money for that. I can't afford you.
Support them on Patreon.
So after I get all these people fired from their jobs, I can bring them on as pity. No, you would do great work for us, Malik. I have no question about that. Let's talk about the bizarre history of the Donkey Kong Land sequel logos and the inconsistencies that have popped up. So,
okay.
Most people probably can spot that Donkey Kong Land 3 uses the Roman numerals, while Donkey Kong Land 2 uses Arabic numerals. So it just uses the number 2, right? While Donkey Kong Land 3 has the 3 lines, like 3 in Roman numerals.
And it's covered by Kitty's giant arm.
Yeah, his monster paw right there. Yeah. So
wow.
It's also worth pointing out that Donkey Kong Land 2 uses a different logo for the land as well. It shrunk the font of land, kind of made it a little bit tighter, and slightly changed the palm tree background, which is just the plasticky, rare Congo jungle palm trees, right? But it visually made them look different. I don't know if it's the same render effectively, but I don't know what it looks different just looking at it, cursory glance there. But what you might not know is that when Donkey Kong Land 2 was announced, it was announced as Donkey Kong Land 2 Diddy's Conquest, and it used a Roman numeral. This was announced at E3 1996, and they even had this like sizzle reel that I've turned into an animated GIF or GIF, that like, it's like Donkey Kong Land 2, Diddy's Conquest, and you can see the original logo, and in early reservation flyers and whatever, like this was the logo used on the mock-up box art. For some reason, they decided, no, let's change this to Arabic numerals and let's drop the subtitle, because people are just going to think this is Donkey Kong Country 2 all over again if we have the Diddy's Conquest. I don't know why they made the shift to Arabic numerals from Roman numerals, but it does keep it more consistent with Donkey Kong Country without drawing that direct correlation to Donkey Kong Country 2. That's all well and good.
I suppose so, yeah.
That's all well and good, but then Donkey Kong Land 3 reverted to the Roman numeral, and I remember when they announced it at E3 97, and I was like, well, surely that's a mistake. They're going to just...
That they're going to correct.
They're just going to change it to the Arabic numeral. But no, they kept it the Roman numeral. So you have this inconsistency. It goes Donkey Kong Land 2, Arabic numeral, Donkey Kong Land 3, Roman numeral. What? What?
If they made a 4, they would just write it out in letters, just 4.
Yeah, they would have to. That's the only way to keep it consistent, is to lean into the inconsistency of it all.
And then we know it's a joke. But I don't think they were joking here.
I also need to point out that this was never like really marketed on any of the like mock-up box arts, but for a time online at least, Donkey Kong Land 3 was marketed with a subtitle of its own, The Race Against Time.
I've heard about this subtitle, but I don't think I've seen it for myself.
It was on like Nintendo.com, like that's the way they listed it, but it never really made its way into like the magazines. I think it was quickly dropped, and whatever. Donkey Kong Land 2 didn't have a subtitle. I'm glad they kept that part consistent, but yeah, what the hell? What the hell?
Oh, kills me. Kill me. Kill me.
Did you know, Malik, that Donkey Kong Land 3 has 2 different title screens depending on when you bought the game?
Yes, and I'm still seething about it.
So, of course, I bought it as soon as it came out in early October 1997. So I had the original version, which is not the version on NSO, mind you. The original version had a very unstylized, like it had the Donkey Kong font. It said Donkey Kong, and then underneath it, in just very scrunched letters, it said Land 3.
Yeah. So you can barely make out the 3.
Yeah.
It's like, what is
then,
that, like a book?
They released an updated build of the game, the 1.1 version. And this has a new subtitle, which has more of a stylized Donkey Kong Land logo with the big 3 underneath. So Donkey Kong Land's all on one line, if you will, and then it has the big 3 underneath. It's weird, right?
Yeah, I definitely like the second one more.
I do too, but I'm more familiar with the first one because that's the version I have. And so playing it on NSO, it just throws me. I mean, playing it on the eShop, the virtual console, almost 10 years ago now, that threw me. I was like, what? What? That's when I first learned about it. I didn't realize this was a thing until, like, I played this build of Donkey Kong Land 3. There's also a difference in the 1.1 version where they've got an additional pit that they added to the level Tundra Blundra, which, again, great name, that wasn't there in the original 1.0 version of the game. There's just an extra pit.
Just to screw with you?
Well, I think they put it in there because you could get stuck or something, or maybe like a steel keg could get stuck or something. Like the pit's there as a failsafe, effectively. But
I see.
Yeah, just you never see like this huge variance in these Donkey Kong releases. Like the original Donkey Kong Country did have differences in later versions, later builds, where they would like patch out certain things, like, oh, you can't do the Winky to Rambi exploit in that one cave level. In the like original release of Donkey Kong Country, if the one cave where you go into the room and there's a Winky crate, you can get Winky, and then if you go back into it with Winky, you get him out of the crate again, and you go through, and then he just becomes Rambi. And so you can have Rambi in the stage, which you can't do. I remember doing that. You can't do on the Virtual Console version because it's from the later build. So yeah.
Meh. Lame.
Donkey Kong Land 3 also has some bizarre, we'll call them errors. They might be flourishes, depending on your point of view, that are widely known and mocked within DK Vine and some of our readers and our listeners. I think the most widely known one is that Diddy balloons appear in the game instead of Dixie balloons. Which,
will Dixie ever get her respect?
Right? Like the marketing team behind Donkey Kong Country 3 like promoted Kitty over her because, ew, girl. And then in Donkey Kong Land 3, she has to collect the life balloons of her boyfriend, who is being an asshole right now, and excluding her. Now, my headcanon is that those balloons exist because Donkey and Diddy are nearby, and Diddy, I guess, because he became a video game hero before Dixie, the balloons are just taking the shape of his head over hers. But yeah, it's weird they went with the Diddy balloons. Of course, Wrinkly has one of the most quoted typos in the Donkey Kong series, where she says, "Keep an eye out for those Kremlins." Kremlins, no G at the end, like the establishment in Moscow. Keep an eye out for those. Yeah,
definitely keep an eye out for them.
Yeah, well, yeah, we should have heeded her advice back in 2016 when they took down our website for a brief time.
She was warning you. She could see the future. She's like, I don't have much time left. Just keep an eye out.
That was her slipping into dementia, because she also has that other line where she's like, why, if it isn't Donkey, I mean Diddy, no, Funky, or whatever. I'm misquoting her there, but yeah, it's like, oh yeah, clearly
she's not long for this world.
She's not long for this world. She's going to be dead within 2 years. Say your goodbyes now.
Little did we know that was actually the case.
That was just foreshadowing. They knew they were going to kill her off.
Mm-hmm.
And Nakas, the Kremlins who hide in the green barrels, they don't hide very well because they're in green barrels, but they... Clobbers they are not, but they hide in the green barrels and they run towards you with their like little arms flailing about upwards. Nakas are erroneously referred to as Crusha in the credits. Now, of course, Crusha is the big muscle-bound Kremlin from Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Land. They in no way resemble Nakas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does this mean that in the context of the world of Donkey Kong, that Nakas are just Crushas who couldn't make weight? They like didn't go to the gym. They didn't work out, and so they were stuck in these barrels and turned into Nakas. And the Donkey Kong Land 3 credits reveals this tantalizing bit of canon. I mean, sure.
Yeah, somewhere in the game's code it says something like, Nakas are malnourished Crushas who could never make gains. So we stuffed them in barrels. Ha, ha.
Or they just ran out of the anabolic steroids that they injected into the Crushas or the Nakas. that turned them into crushes.
That works too.
Yeah.
If it hasn't been confirmed that they take roids.
I think they probably take roids.
Okay.
Yeah, like you can't retain that physique long term. Like even like these like actors in these superhero movies, they look like that very specifically for these shots. And like it's like, you do a bunch of push-ups right before you go on set. You can't retain that physique without long-term health damage. Yeah, they're definitely on roids.
Yeah, that reminds me of a cartoon where someone wanted to get instant abs, and then the commercial ends by saying, abs will revert to fat later in life. That just makes me laugh. So yeah.
So here's a juicy piece of trivia for you, Malik. Donkey Kong Land 3 trivia that's just dripping with juice.
Dirty dish rag juice.
So the Sheepy Shop. The Sheepy Shop in Donkey Kong Land 3, which is run by Bear/Bazaar.
Yes. Sometimes animated, sometimes not.
Depending on your region, right? So this is kind of the gambling parlor that this Brothers Bear runs. And you might be like, well, why is it called the Sheepy Shop? What the hell does that mean? The Sheepy Shop, Malik, was the nickname that Rare employees gave to a local establishment in the 1990s. Now, this was apparently a news agent / post office / convenience store in the village of Sheepy Magna, which was close to the Manor House, which is where Rare was located in the 1990s before they moved to Manor Park. And during their lunch breaks, this was the closest business they could reach on their lunch break and still make it back in time where they could grab food. And
it basically kept them alive.
Yeah. So this was actually part of the Happy Shopper convenience store brand that was prevalent in the UK until about 1998 or so. And then most of them rebranded to Premier stores. But yeah, they called this the Sheepy Shop because of where it was located. And they would run here. They would able to conduct business or grab a quick bite to eat, grab a beverage. It's no longer in business. It's no longer actually there. But the physical space, the building is still there. And it was actually close to the Italian restaurant I ate at when I went to Rare in 2016.
You lucky duck, you. Did you take a picture?
I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know that was the Sheepy Shop, just that, this building, because it wasn't in business by that point. But the building's still there. It's something else now. But yeah, I didn't know that was the fabled Sheepy Shop.
Wow. Yeah, this needs to be in a Did You Know Gaming.
Yeah.
For real.
Yeah. I even provided you, Malik, in our show notes, a little image of what the Sheepy Shop looked like at that time.
At that time? So this is is this a picture from the late 90s or?
No, I think this was from 2009 or so. Yeah. Because this is
very nice. I
this
like
is,
it.
I think a Google Earth image that was taken from then. Yeah.
Very quaint little place. I like it.
Yeah. So yeah, this was the only place that Rare employees could reach if they wanted a quick bite to eat or whatever on their lunch break. So they called it the Sheepy Shop, and because clearly they didn't care by the time Donkey Kong Land 3 was in development because of all the pun names, and they were just like, you know what, we're gonna put the Sheepy Shop in this game. We're gonna immortalize it as the establishment that the Brothers Bear runs.
Mm-hmm. Seems appropriate. I would do that to a convenience store that kept me alive.
So let's talk about character appearances really quick. Let's crunch the numbers. And Crunch, of course, didn't debut until Diddy Kong Racing. But did you know, Malik? I asked the Did You Know Gaming guy, did you know Frankie never appears in the Donkey Kong Land trilogy? Not really. While
yeah. No, I knew that.
Okay, well, so some people might not think about this kind of stuff because Cranky factored in heavily in the first game's plot, of course, and he was visually referenced through a portrait hanging in Wrinkly Refuge in Donkey Kong Land 3, but he never once makes an actual appearance within any of the 3 games themselves.
I just like how his presence is felt, even though he's not really there. I wish, I like when games do that, where it's like, he's not here, but he's with us in spirit.
Right. You still feel Cranky whenever you play a Donkey Kong Land game.
Yeah, you resent him for making you go in Land 1. It's like, I'm only here because Cranky decided to go behind my back and do this stuff to me because he loves me so much.
Cranky Kong commits treason is effectively what the game is about. But other Kongs and animal buddies from the Donkey Kong Country games who never appear in the Donkey Kong Land trilogy are Candy Kong, Swanky Kong, Winky the Frog, Glimmer the Anglerfish, and of course, Perry the Parallel Bird. Now, this is despite the fact that Glimmer does appear on the Donkey Kong Land 2 box. And,
that's false advertising.
That's false advertising. There should have been a class action lawsuit against Nintendo, quite honestly. Uh-huh. Donkey and Diddy also don't appear at all in Donkey Kong Land 3, which is the only time Donkey Kong never makes an appearance in a game with Donkey Kong in the title. And it's the only time that Diddy doesn't appear in any rare Donkey Kong game. I mean, his balloon, his head appears in it, sort of, but that doesn't really count. Yeah.
No. Especially since he was being sexist in that game.
Right.
The less we see of Diddy in that game, the better, I say.
He learned a valuable lesson. He did. And he included Dixie and Tiny in Diddy Kong Racing DS because of the lesson he learned in Donkey Kong Land 3. By the numbers really quick, Diddy made 2 appearances in the Land trilogy. Dixie made 2 appearances in the Land trilogy. Wrinkly Kong made 2 appearances in the Land trilogy. She's really the Kong Helper MVP of the Land trilogy. Rambi, Squawks, Ingard, and Squitter all made 2 appearances within the Land trilogy, but the winner, the only character who has a perfect attendance streak in all 3 Donkey Kong Land games, K. Rool. K. Rool is the only one who appears in every Donkey Kong Land game.
I like that. I feel like he could have missed out on one. I feel like that's the kind of thing they could have done, but they didn't.
They didn't, No, so whenever you feel bad about King K. Rool not appearing in the theme park, you can placate yourself by reminding you that, hey, at least he's there in all 3 Donkey Kong Land games, and they are relevant right now.
Yep, they are available right now. I see people thinking K. Rool's been forgotten. That couldn't be farther from the truth right now.
Outside of King K. Rool, none of the bosses of the original Donkey Kong Country appear in any of the Donkey Kong Land games. Now, as far as Donkey Kong Country 2 goes, Cudgel does not appear in Donkey Kong Land 2 due to the merging of Crocodile Cauldron and Creme Key into Creme Cauldron. As far as Donkey Kong Country 3 bosses go, Belcha and Squirt don't show back up for Land 3. They are excised from Donkey Kong Land 3. However, the other Donkey Kong Country 3 bosses, including Chaos, do appear.
Yeah, I just beat Bleak earlier today, and he just stands there menacingly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different perspective fighting Bleak, because he's not popping up from snowy hill banks laughing maniacally. He's just kind of standing there.
He could just wipe the floor with me. He's a giant snowman, but he chooses not to.
He's a giant snowman who's already exploded once, so he probably is worried about his structural integrity.
Yep, now that he knows that he is a snowman and he is mortal.
So, Donkey Kong Land sold just under 4 million copies, which was quite a bit for a Game Boy game. In fact, it did outsell Donkey Kong 94, for those curious. Donkey Kong Land 2 sold 2.35 million copies, So, a little more than half of what Donkey Kong Land sold. And Donkey Kong Land 3, coming out in October 1997, sold just over 1 million copies. It just barely made it. However, only Donkey Kong Land and Donkey Kong Land 2 got the Player's Choice million seller reissues with a little gold emblem on their package. Donkey Kong Land 3 never got a reissue despite being technically a million seller.
That's again, Dixie doesn't get any respect. She sold 1 million copies.
Right. I mean, I think by the time it would have rolled around for the reissue, they were already on the Game Boy Color and in the thick of Pokemon Mania. So I think it was just more of a timing thing that made that sort of, not worth it. And of course, Rare did do the Game Boy Color version for Japan. So it's not like they forgot about Donkey Kong Land 3. And then finally, as a last little note of Donkey Kong Land trivia, Conker would play Donkey Kong Land in his idle animation in Conker's Pocket Tales. You hear the little title music of Donkey Kong Land.
I remember that blowing me away, and I did put that in a Did You Know Gaming 10 years ago.
Yeah?
But it was so cool to see. I feel like Conker is still playing Game Boy games even in 2024 because that's just what he does. That's just what he likes.
In Bad Fur Day, he would play the Game Boy port of Killer Instinct. But in Pocket Tales, he's playing Donkey Kong Land. And if you say, well, that's proof, Hyle, that Conker doesn't exist in the same shared universe as the Kongs, I say, shut your mouth, you idiot, because Donkey Kong plays Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze in the Switch version of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. He's playing the very game he's in. Explain that, asshole.
Yeah, it's like playing life.
All right, Malik, we got some calls to take about Donkey Kong Land 1, 2, and 3. You ready for this?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
Which might not be saying much, but we're going to have to take the calls anyway.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Hey, Hyle. Hey, Malik. This is Shrouder of the Stars here, calling in. Hyle, Malik, you both look ravishing, look radiant. It's been a few conversations I called in, Hyle. I wanted to call into this one that, for games that probably no one my age, the Returns generation probably have played, or maybe the 3DS versions, or maybe they went out of their way to get the originals, but I'm just calling to say I'm happy for you and for all the fans of these games, and just, it's so cool that these sort of, let's admit, inferior games to the, SNES games, of course, that, Nintendo re-released them. That's super cool. It'll be interesting to see at the time of this call and recording when they will add the Game Boy Color in GBH Trilogy. I think that may be too much of a similar game at once. I could be wrong, but I don't know. Regardless, it's super cool that they're on there. It's even more exciting that, they will carry forward to the Switch successor. I definitely do think the Switch, or probably the successor, will be the ultimate DKU machine, to sort of bring up a point you brought up before, Hyle. King of Swing would be cool on there. Obviously, 64, of course. I mean, all of them will probably be on there. If the DK Land games are on there, I'm not really too worried about that. I would ask you what you want next, but I know how you're just going to say Diddy Kong Racing, so I don't really have a question about that. I don't know if I have any question. It's exciting that these games are on there. They came at a pretty steady pace. Obviously, just good things for Donkey Kong that Nintendo would go out of their way to put these games on there. Obviously, DK Your Turns is coming up, but yeah, pretty exciting times. You two take care of yourself. The scary world out there, so stay grounded or whatever. I don't know. Stay sane. See you.
Well, thank you for the call, Traveler of the Stars. And I will stay grounded unless I'm in Monkey Mountains and Chimpanzee Clouds, for then I shall be touching the sky.
I was gonna make a grounded joke, but I'm a grown man. I don't get grounded no more.
and yeah, of course, we are speculating about, like, will we get Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color? Will we get the Donkey Kong Country Game Boy Advance Remake Trilogy? Will we get DK King of Swing? And then there's still the N64 games we need to get. But yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about everything. I think at this point in time, the odds are we will be seeing everything eventually on NSO.
I think so too. I feel pretty good, even if we don't get anything after this. I mean, I'll still be a little upset, but I'm like, hey, we got some pretty good stuff already. This is pretty nice.
Yeah, like just to be able to play the original N64 Banjo-Kazooie games and Donkey Kong Land Trilogy on the same system, that would have blown my mind as a kid.
It's blowing my mind now.
All right, let's go ahead and play our second call.
Hey, Hyle. My name is Chico D. Mar. I've been a listener for a while. Long time caller, first time. Wait a minute, I got that backwards. Long time listener, or first time caller. Anyways, I thought it'd be a special time on just a call. Just because the Land Trilogy means so much to me. I think my first exposure to Donkey Kong was actually the Land Trilogy. Games like Copper. I think the first thing that stuck out to me back in '97 was seeing Land on my Game Boy, and just like looking at those flying pig enemies. And I think that seems to be the impression that a lot of people get first off when they check out Land, and just the random flying pigs right there. It was the only Donkey Kong I had, actually. So it was as good a time as I was going to get. But it also brought me to you guys, and I've been a long-time listener ever since. I think my first real exposure to the conversation was listening to you guys talking about your Land 2 theory and how it connects as a sequel to Donkey Kong Country 2. After that very interesting listen I had, I believe it was in 2012 or something like that. I just guess I couldn't look away from you guys. It's been a good time ever since. So I thought it'd be good to leave a message and just say, hey, thanks to Donkey Kong Land and thanks to you guys for all the memories. Ciao.
Well, thank you so much for the call. Always great to hear first-time callers. Not that I don't love our reoccurring callers. I love everyone who calls in, Malik.
Yeah.
But it's always great to hear fresh voice. Because it makes me feel like I'm not just playing to the same crowd, like I'm some sort of washed up has-been who hasn't had a hit in 20 years, and I'm just like, yeah, here's my classic song that you all love. I'm playing it to a bar full of 6 people, but no, it's awesome to hear.
Oddly personal.
It's awesome to hear, what I said at the top of the episode, just what Donkey Kong Land means to people, and how this was a lot of people's first Donkey Kong experience just by accessibility. And yeah, Hogwash the Flying Pig, I think it's an all-timer Donkey Kong baddie for those people, because you jump into the game, second level, there's a flying pig. On the box, flying pig. It's such a memorable thing. That's where I learned the term hogwash, was from Donkey Kong Land. It's where I learned the term when pigs fly, from Donkey Kong Land. Donkey Kong Land really taught me so much, Malik.
I didn't know Hogwash's name for years because I didn't have an instruction manual. But yeah, when I saw the cartridge, I was like, am I looking at this right? Is that a flying pig? And yeah, no, it's the first thing that sticks out to me. And I was like, wow, this is weird.
Of course, the Donkey Kong series would get far weirder in time. Like, hogwash almost seems quaint now in, like, the era post-Cobcock, but, you know, at the time, sure. The hogwash was as weird as it got.
I like him. He needs to come back. Maybe Hogwash is like he's probably a distant cousin of Professor Chops.
I've said on Blue Sky that, you know, they could always, there's still time at least to put wings on the DK Wild hot dog at Super Nintendo World and say, oh yeah, they're just made from like slaughtered hogwashes.
oh, sure, why not?
Makes it a little less dark than them eating the kin of their friend and ally, Professor Chops.
I guess.
All right, we have another call, one more, and then we'll wrap things up with a quick announcement. Ooh.
Hey, Hyle, it's me, Freezer, the world's biggest fan of the Donkey Kong Land trilogy. So that isn't to discredit you or Malik, because you're both okay. Now, what I love about this release is it gives normal people a chance to play these great games. I'm sure everyone else has basically called in and said that. But I've got a friend called Elliot, and he isn't like us. Every time I tell him about your website or your podcast, I can just feel his life energy depleting. Sometimes he's polite, and he'll continue the conversation instead of turning around and just ignoring me. But whenever he does, he just says something like, how can they still have episodes to talk about? What topics are left? The fucking idiot. What a piece of goddamn shit. Anyway, he's a normal DKC fan, because, you know, he has a job and he has sex and stuff, but also he played these games in the 90s. But he didn't play the Game Boy much back then, because he didn't think it was as cool as the Atari Lynx. And that crime of this, like, because of that, he never played the Land trilogy, despite how often I told him about Bear Bear, who we all know as Banjo's father. He's missing out on all this important lore. Now, the last week or so, whenever a new DK Land announcement for Switch Online came out, he'd message me excitedly. And then the other day I talked to him about it, and he said he finally played these games for the first time and found them really fun. That alone is just so amazing. I'm happy that normal people are playing these. And I know the 3DS also kind of released them, though no one paid for them because why would you spend money? And also, they came out towards the end of the 3DS's life, if I remember correctly. But this is better than that because we also get very easy access to the Japanese version of Land 3. And that version is basically better in every single way, except Bear Bear doesn't animate, and I also can't read the funny level names. So yeah, this is a huge announcement for me. I can't think of much better besides the release of It's Mr. Pants, the release of Saber Wolf, the release of Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge, the release of the other one, the pilot game. That's basically all that matters. I think there's a Diddy Kong game that people like as well, about racing. It'd be cool if that got released, but basically, this is some of the best announcements we've had as a rare fandom since, you know, I mean, Cameo was okay.
Well, thanks for the call, Freezer. Always
okay, apparently.
Yeah, always a mixed bag from Freezer. Like I always feel elated and put down at the same time.
Yep. I love it. Don't ever stop.
And yeah, it's been really wild to speak to Freezer's anecdote there. And from what I've been seeing, the positive reception that Donkey Kong Land has been given. I mean, the first game in particular, because that's something I've heard so much when it does come up is how janky it is, how like rougher it plays compared to Donkey Kong Country. Like, oh, if you fall off the screen, you just die, and but
worst game ever, 0 out of 10.
people are like looking at it from the proper historical context, it seems. And maybe it is because it is on NSO and you're not actually paying for it unless, obviously the NSO is subscription, but it's not this unique purchase you are making. It is part of this platform. And maybe people are like going into it with a more open mind now because they are responding to it like people might have responded to it in 1995 when it was new. And that's really refreshing to see. It's like, I don't have to make excuses for it. People are just enjoying it. This is nice.
What is this, Bizarro Day? I mean, I like it, but I never expected to see something like that from like the general public. People accepting a thing for what it is?
In the live stream, Porygon Q joined us and said, I fucking love Donkey Kong Land. And then there's several exclamation points after that. I'm not going to count the exclamation points, but there's quite a bit. And I love to see the enthusiasm.
Yeah, you love to see it.
So, yeah, there's so much more I have to say about the Donkey Kong Land trilogy. And Malik, I pitched this episode to you and I was like, it'll be 90 minutes and we've gone about an hour beyond that. So
yeah, I knew it wasn't going to be 90 minutes, but I'm that's okay.
I structured my episode notes to only take us to 90 minutes and somehow that expanded outwards into another hour. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm just, the Spotify Wrapped came out and it was just like, what kind of podcaster are you? And Spotify defined me as the storyteller because I'm so long-winded and my episodes are so long compared to other podcasts. Not every podcast. There are longer podcasts than us, but yes, apparently I am
really?
the story. Yeah, apparently, really, yeah, there are. But I am the storyteller because I've done over 120 hours this season of the Kongversation.
Whoa.
That's over 4 days, Malik. That's if you started listening to this show at 5 p.m. on a Friday. You're like, I'm gonna listen to the Kongversation season this weekend. You would not actually return to work until that Thursday, because that would take you to like 5 p.m. Wednesday to get through everything so far. So
it's good content to just sit around and do nothing to her. No, I work when I listen to the Kongversation. And I know you've been like, how do you work with that? But it does work.
I work when I record the Kongversation, so. Anyway, thank you to everyone who called in. Thank you to everyone who joined us in the live stream. And like I said, I have a lot more to say about Donkey Kong Land and Donkey Kong Land 2 and Donkey Kong Land 3 that I cannot possibly fit in here. Now, again, we've done quite a few episodes on the Kongversation in the years. The famous Spotlight episode on Donkey Kong Land 2 with Lockjaw Saga playing underneath it that everybody just loves and they still bring up to me to this day and they say, do more like that. Exactly like that. I love that episode.
They want more.
We've done these anniversary retrospectives outside of the Spotlight format. And like I said, you got to check out that interview I did with Paul Makachek a couple months back. We get into Donkey Kong, like about a third of the episode is Donkey Kong Land discussion. And it's Mr. Pants discussion freezer. It's in there, but yes. So, you can dive into it if you need more Donkey Kong Land content. But if you're only interested in brand new content or contents, which I find a more palatable term than just content, because content is disposable. Content lives forever, Malik. Well, here's my announcement. I'm bringing back DK Vine Done Slow on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/DK Vine, this week. And I will be playing all 3 Donkey Kong Land games, starting with the original Donkey Kong Land. I will be providing commentary. I will be providing insights. I will be providing even more trivia than what I rattled off here. He's in Donkey Kong Land too. And, of course, all of my upsetting, bizarre headcanons. I will be sharing it all as I play through all 3 Donkey Kong Land games. Starting this week, check your local listings, i.e. Blue Sky, and I'll let patrons know as well.
The Gorilla Drip is back.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.